So, Rob, one of the things that we hear about often when I mentioned self-service as the North Star, right, that developers and users of the infrastructure are able to provision it themselves. But organization leaders and executives are concerned about cost. That becomes a huge issue, especially in cloud, because we've all heard of that kind of story of someone provisioned a VM, with 15 different GPUs to test something out and then forgot to turn it off. And then a month later, they found out they've got a giant bill in their hands. So that is a big concern. And our platform, Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise, give you some features to kind of avoid that type of situation, right? And that cost concern becomes a huge blocker for being able to kind of give up that little bit of control so that users can, the infrastructure users can manage the infrastructure themselves. With these features, what we're trying to do is kind of manage some of those fears, manage some of those concerns by giving leaders or the platform operators the ability to surface what specific configurations that run in Terraform cost. So we have this cost estimation feature built into the platform where we can talk to the cloud provider API, be using the plan information. If you remember that plan apply workflow we were talking about, we're able to use that plan stage to determine what resources will exist at the end of the apply. Using that, we can talk to the cloud provider API again, and the big three surface cost information about specific resources. So we're able to ingest that and give you a cost estimate of the resources you're creating. Most often, the expensive resources end up being things like load balancers or VMs that people have created. So we're able to provide you a cost estimate of that. So you can easily tell, visually inspect and say, oh, okay, I've just created a dev environment and I expect it to cost $10,000 a month. Maybe something is off there, right? Or maybe that's fine. Maybe your flag is it's a concern only if it costs $100,000 a month. The feature that builds on top of that is Sentinel, our policy as code engine. So we don't want people to go in and manually look at that cost estimate and say, that looks fine, because that's an additional step. And then it's also relying on your judgment. What we can do is codify your organization's policy that we expect dev environments to cost, for example, $10,000. And if it's anything more than that, we want it to get flagged for additional review before we allow it to get created. So we can create these policies that get automatically applied so that I, as an infrastructure user, when I go and try to provision this resource with that 15 GPU machine, the platform will tell me that this exceeds the cost that my team, for example, is allowed to use for dev environments. Then it's up to the policy writer. We can decide to completely block it or issue a warning or send a message to a different person to come in and approve that run so that that plan can then be converted into an apply. That the policy as code engine builds on top of that cost estimation to give you, guardrails so that you don't get that surprise bill at the end of the month because you've got a little bit of a forewarning or an estimate of what the cost is going to look like. Did you get a chance to kind of work with their customer to help determine how they would manage costs for their cloud environments, and any help you offered them there?
Yeah, so some of the things that we've implemented, you mentioned the cost estimating features within Terraform. We have that as part of every one of our Terraform runs. So we do our plan, we do our cost estimation, we do our apply, and at the moment we haven't rolled the Sentinel product into that to stand up these guardrails at this point. Mostly just because of where we are in the process with this particular customer. So from the crawl, walk, run standpoint, we're at that crawl to walk stage with them at the moment, where we are taking advantage of the cost estimation feature. We are able to show them the numbers that we're seeing as a result of having those runs prior to an apply. And if there's any kind of flags that kind of raise, it's visual and manual at this point, again, without having Sentinel in place, we can act upon that. And that said, even if things kind of, ran out the door and we weren't able to stop it, or we didn't know to stop it, one of the other, I think, huge benefits from Terraform and the consistency that it provides is it really does an amazing job of helping us be consistent with our tagging. So we have a particular tagging strategy that we've created, and we know that anybody who manually provisions a resource, maybe they'll tag it, maybe they won't, maybe they'll be partially tagged, maybe it'll be the wrong key value pairs that, we've said it was going to be this, for owner, but you capitalized the O and we wanted it all lowercase, you put a space at the end of it, silly things like that. But, with Terraform, it's consistent. So I know that through my tagging, the additional numbers that I want to see based on the how much I'm spending, then this is basic to any resources stand up in any particular cloud provider. I can look at the cost numbers, the real numbers in AWS through the Cost Explorer filter based on those tags, and I'm confident of what I'm looking at because I know that Terraform helped tag all of those resources. So I know every one of this particular owner, this particular application is truly what, is reality. And I have a high confidence that application X truly is costing me this much. The owner of these sets of applications is, costing this much. And, without Terraform, we had a heck of a time trying to wrangle all of that to begin with. But from that initial early on cost estimation feature from running the plan and the apply, and during those steps, to ultimately seeing what the reality is down the road as I've been running for a little bit based on these tags that, again, Terraform's giving me high confidence in because I use them all the time. I query all of my resources based on tagging because of what Terraform and the consistency it provides. I get some good insight into the numbers, and it's insight that I wouldn't have necessarily had before, or the confidence I wouldn't have had before in those numbers had I not known that we were auto provisioning the infrastructure and this being part of that.
Right. That's a great insight. Consistency, not just producing quality, but also helping you manage costs because you understand where that cost is coming from.
That's right. And I can go back then and look at what's costing so much, go to that code base, if you will, and adjust accordingly, and then rerun and understand, here's my new cost estimate. Am I close with it after it's been, baking for a while after I've deployed it, and get some new numbers. And I should be able to scale up and down as needed, right? Based on whatever my thresholds are. But it provides that additional insight and some reality around what my numbers are, how much I'm actually spending related to however I'm slicing up my environments or my cloud to be, and adjusting accordingly and rather easily through Terraform from an infrastructure perspective.
Yeah. Yep. You heard me mention Sentinel, right? And how the policy as code engine can be used to create a policy around the cost estimate. This is possibly the most common Sentinel policy we see, is a policy that enforces tags so that, I can iterate through your resources and make sure there's, maybe I define 3 required tags that every single resource should have: resource owner, cost center, and maybe environment, right? That way I know if it's a prod resource and if it doesn't have other tags, maybe I leave it alone. I don't want to take prod down by, tearing it down. But what Sentinel can do is check before that resource is provisioned in the configuration. It can take that plan output and see if the required tags with the casing and spelling and all that stuff, whether they're in place or not, and then either block the provisioning if you don't provide the right tags and tell you, hey, we blocked your resources from being created because our policy dictates you should have these 3 required tags and you didn't provide them. And that's really powerful. And again, Terraform provides consistency, but Sentinel gives you that way to enforce that consistency, so that you're setting up that guardrail that you mentioned for the infrastructure users, so that as they create these resources, they're providing the information that you might need on the tail end for, optimizing the environment, if you will. So pretty powerful feature, combination with policy and the cost estimate.
Yep, absolutely. And you highlighted 2 great areas for us as our priority 1 and 2 for implementing Sentinel once we get to that point in our process.
That's very cool to see because, there's lots of features in the platform, but our customers often need knowledgeable partners like yourself to kind of help them discover, here's some possibilities, here's some use cases, here's how we can do things better with this tool, right? We might have invested in and the objective that we have. but it requires that kind of expert guidance along the way. So great to hear that that's on your radar.
From a lessons learned perspective with our current customer, there's some things we noticed. We wish we probably would have done a little better job looking back and, maybe been more aggressive in certain areas or a little bit more attention to detail in certain areas. And, there's reasons for rolling in a new solution, Terraform in this case, and trying to get ramped up quickly and get out in front of all the work that was already, in flight or soon to be in flight. So, some of those, we cut some corners along the way, but looking back, we probably should have done a better job of, identifying some key stakeholders and calling out some champions around, this is what we're doing with respect to infrastructure as code. We had some buy-in from some certain people, which was important, but we probably could have spread that across leadership a little bit more and had them understand what we were doing and rally their individual troops as well and make just the broad sense of, here's our direction, here's how we're doing this now, here's how we're going to be provisioning infrastructure within AWS, and kind of go from there, as opposed to working with a particular team and having it be new to them. We're going to do what how we're going to do that. So that was one. Communication is super important as well. We probably would have been better off with a little bit more constant stream of communication and maybe a better means of disseminating that information. We initially stood up and we're still using it, actually. We stood up a wiki page. Yeah. And people have access to it, but not everybody knows it's there. It's getting kind of lengthy, so not everybody wants to read it. We're not the best authors, so it's not fun to read either. It's just a lot of facts. But the idea of constant communication, early engagement whenever possible as well, so we're not catching teams off guard and saying, you can't go, your application can't be hosted in AWS because you didn't provision resources through Terraform. And now you're trying to go, to production next week, but it's all been click-opt. Yep. So trying to get in front of some of that work has been fun.
I think as an engineer, an interesting way to encourage that communication that has worked for me in the past. This is very much engineering focus, is that with infrastructure as code, since it's code that is managed your version control system, right? I've often used pull requests as the platform for that communication, where you give this example of a team that may not be aware that our infrastructure doesn't exist. If members of the team knew that they have Terraform configurations, the rest of the team doesn't know. Pull requests are a great way to show people, here are the changes that are coming. Other people can comment on them, understand what's going to happen, and then correspondingly they're aware of what's going to happen when this gets merged and gets launched. And Terraform and infrastructure as code in general kind of enable that a little bit, where instead of creating a huge document that explains this is architecture and these are other things that we're about to change, that pull request becomes sort of that living document that you can, obviously there's some engineering expertise required where you understand what the language is and what you're trying to do. You get a live look into what will happen in the future. And I think especially across teams, as we were talking about earlier, if you have a networking team that's going to make a change, they could make the development team a reviewer of the pull request, where they know for sure that someone from the dev team came in, looked at, here are the DNS updates we're going to roll out at the end of the week. And the dev team was aware that this is exactly what's going to exist at the end of the week, and then we can start preparing for it with our configuration changes. At the engineering level, at least, that's a problem, sort of a solution for that problem. But communication definitely a challenge that I think we're all trying to figure out in the modern organization today.
Yeah, true. And the pull request is a good example. So we certainly make use of the pull request for all of our Terraform code, and we probably have our list of approvers that are more targeted towards the people actually doing the Terraform coding. And I think it's a good point that we can certainly have, at least as optional reviewers, other areas of pockets of teams or people that would maybe impacted by rolling out these changes. So I agree. I think that's a great approach to be able to expand the means of communication. One of the other things, in looking at how we initially rolled out Terraform, we didn't look at how other tools might help integrate to help us out. And, for example, TerraGrunt. We make heavy use of TerraGrunt right now. And in the very early stages, we didn't. We were just trying to get things created and outdoor and make the project teams happy and the infrastructure teams happy. But understanding some of the goodness that we get from TerraGrunt made us go back and we got to stop. We're going to implement this now. And we did that, and it's made our lives a lot easier. And on top of that, we did some other sort of code analysis. The whole, what did we use? We use TFSAC and Checkov right now for some security scans. Infracost was one of the things we looked at for cost estimations, various linters and formatters for the code itself, and things that we evolved to once we actually had the time. They were always kind of on the roadmap, but things that we probably should have implemented a little sooner and taken the time hit versus a little later probably would have been a little bit more beneficial. Thankfully, we didn't let it run too long before we decided to do that. But that's we found those things to be very valuable and would have just liked to have done it sooner. So
yeah,
and then we just a couple other things to touch on. Understanding module scope, and this is where I go back to. We have an aspect of is it a global thing? Is it an account level thing? Is it an application level thing? A database level thing? How far down the food chain is this thing that we're building, this Terraform script that we're building to provision infrastructure, and be able to that would help us better define who should be maintaining that, who the owner is of these things, who should have access to this thing, as you mentioned, workspaces and the like, and calling those out and being able to, a good way to provide some boundaries, some access security around the different Terraform code bases that we're putting in place. I actually identifying the things that we were building and highlighting some of those boundaries or documenting them would have been a good for us, a little bit more valuable upfront, as well as we got to a point where, well, who's supposed to maintain this? Well, this is a networking thing. Well, do the networking guys know about that? Maybe they don't. Maybe we should have told them. Maybe we should have done it again, communication, right? But at least we were structured to be able to say, okay, we can secure it. We can let only the right people have access to it. But just documenting the different, what I keep calling module scope, would have been helpful as well. And actually, I thought I had two more points. That was the final point. That was, all of these things were key lessons that we learned after the fact, not too long after the fact, but still things that we could have done a better job on, and things that we could have maybe implemented a little bit sooner. But due to various things, we didn't until a little bit later. But now we know, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, you mentioned lessons learned, and those are relatively easier things to fix. And I think that again highlights the importance of having that expert guide like Prime TSR with you, right? As there's a lot of different challenges, a lot of forks in the road that people can go down once they start their cloud adoption and infrastructure modernization journey. And even if you pick Terraform, right, we obviously think that's the right way to do it. But even after that, there's a lot of forks in the road. So it's always great to have an experienced guide that has been down that road before and can tell you, here's the pros and cons of each approach and why you might want to go down a specific track. So yeah,
and my takeaway from that was it's a little frustrating to know these are the things that we're supposed to do. These are the things that we should be implementing, but like anything else, due to various time commitments and things needing to get out the door, you cut corners a little bit, put things on the backlog, and you get back to it. You just try not to let the backlog grow too crazy, before you start tending to some of that tech debt and implement it. And thankfully, we've done it enough times to where we know some of the things that we couldn't put on the backlog, let it wait for a little bit of time, and then draw the line and say, no, we've got to actually tend to these items now, right, for the greater good.
I think that works, but usually TerraGrunt is something that doesn't work with the enterprise and cloud, but it's fine.
We've been using it like crazy, literally. I mean, it's littered throughout everything that we've done, and we haven't found we haven't run into any walls yet, or any blockers or issues or concerns at this point. I'd be interested, some of the things you'd say to watch out for with respect to TerraGrunt, because it's helped us remain dry and some other things.
Right. It's a good tool that lets you build Terraform in the opinionated way that TerraGrunt thinks that you should do it. And from our perspective, right, we're obviously they're using the open source Terraform, and generally our problem with that is that there's no direct path to migrate from. If you're using Terraform open source straight up, very easy to come into the enterprise platform. If you're using TerraGrunt, you actually authored Terraform configurations that are designed to work with TerraGrunt and not Terraform straight up, right? I couldn't take the configuration and run Terraform apply without having TerraGrunt in place. So some of the decisions that you make around how do we manage states, how do we automatically pass in variables, those are challenges that we think cloud and enterprise solve, but TerraGrunt also solves them in a different way. But the two ways don't offer an easy path from one to the other without kind of extensive code changes. So that is our main kind of objection to TerraGrunt. So some of the things around state management, common problem is like you have to have your buckets and things like that set up before you're running Terraform, right? Because you need that bucket to exist, or wherever you're storing state, you need that to exist before your Terraform run happens. So you've probably done that, and then have references to that in TerraGrunt for state management and vars files. To take that out is a little bit of work, and whenever we see customers that adopt later on, because of whatever reason, we're able to convince them that Terraform Enterprise and Cloud are a good solution for them. There's a little bit of a heartache when they switch over from TerraGrunt to Terraform straight up. And
well, the fun thing is we're using Terraform Cloud
with TerraGrunt.
Yep.
So, okay. So basically then you're just using Terraform Cloud as the state management. You're using TerraGrunt to run Terraform on a CI system and then talking to Terraform Cloud for state management. And
that is largely correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid approach. That is one of the reasons that the platform, everything we try to do is API driven, and you kind of plugged right into that, right? We allow you to, the cloud and enterprise platform allow you to execute Terraform on the platform itself, where we are running the binary for you. We provide the right version, whatever's necessary. We will pull, we'll connect to your VCS repository, your version control system, download from GitHub your Terraform configurations and run that for you. Or there's the other approach, which is what you adopted here, is you're downloading the configuration, you're doing the integration pieces of how do I get from VCS the configuration in the right place. Then you execute Terraform, and using the API, you're using cloud for state management and pieces along the way. So that's a valid approach too. We see several customers do that.
Yeah, and because we wanted to make sure we integrated, and I'm not sure how this would have impacted our decisions with TerraGrunt or not, but we also use Azure Devops for our build release cycles for the applications, right. And we were doing a similar thing. We started doing a similar thing with Terraform as well, and so our orchestration and everything is occurring within Azure Devops. State management and everything else, as you already said, is happening in Terraform Cloud. Because before we actually evolved to that, we were actually taking these things and manually running a lot of this stuff through the AWS CLI, and it was still running through Terraform Cloud and state management and all that other stuff. We were just manually doing it. So we're removing the manual piece, let Azure DevOps orchestrate and automate that portion of, this is what we're going to run for, this workspace or that workspace, or whatever.
Yep.
And it still seems to have worked out well. I don't know that TerraGrunt really had an impact, good or bad, either way with that.
No, I think that's great. That shows the expertise you've got, right? I know Azure DevOps is the tool of choice for a lot of people for the full kind of CI/CD platform. Infrastructure is just part of it, and the way you've integrated that as into the existing Azure DevOps pipeline, that's awesome, because now we know Terraform is good for managing infrastructure, but usually to get your application up and running, there's stuff that has to happen after that, right? Either whether it's deploying application code onto the infrastructure that's been created, running some sort of automated test, switching blue-green load balancers, whatever things you're doing to get traffic into your application on infrastructure. We do a part of that, but there's stuff that needs to happen around it. And I think you found an elegant solution in Azure Devops where you're using Terraform for state management, the infrastructure management pieces, and then there's other things that you can do after it to get your application up.
Yeah, and it seems to be working pretty well for us at the moment. We're trying to mature that a little bit, continually mature it as we move forward in time. But we got it to a pretty good workable state at this particular customer now, and we like that. So everything's been knock on wood, right? It's been treating us pretty well so far.
Great. That's awesome to hear. Value for us, value for the customer. Everyone's winning. Awesome.
That's right.